Welcome to This Got Me Thinking, where clarity comes from conversations and the connections that spark from them. I am your host, Chris LaFay, and today I had the pleasure of chatting with Sal Amami. And like a lot of fractional folks, you go from the corporate sphere into being self-employed, and there's this large jostling that happens, right? Well, with Sal in particular, he went from working these extraordinarily bureaucratic corporate jobs at very large organizations to immediately starting work with highly nimble startups who are in this mindset of go fast and break things. And there's this huge shift, right? You're going like at 20, 25 miles an hour, and then you're like immediately merging onto the Autobahn and having to adjust to what that new speed looks like. And so Sal talks to us today a little bit about how did he handle that shift and how did he use some pro bono work to really understand what he was getting into as he was working through crafting what it is that the impact that he wanted to make. I'll let Sal tell his story. Unpack a challenging time that you had, perhaps maybe it was in the process of moving from being an employee to being self-employed, or perhaps there was a challenging time during being self-employed that really shaped how you are as a leader. And so I don't necessarily know what those things are. We haven't really dove into any of those types of things in the past. And I'm curious if there's any particular challenge and story that you've gone through in the past. When I say those things resonates with you, that like kind of like a light bulb pops in your head.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So as I mentioned previously, about 5 years ago, I made the transition from corporate America to working with startups on my own, and so there was a lot of challenges that I ran into, but at the same time, I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned was that um, startups are, you've got this culture of go fast and break things. And as you're doing that, it's very difficult to be predictive in your go to market. And I'm just primarily speaking of go to market, but this is true for other aspects of it as well, product development and all that stuff, right? Um, so that in itself was a bit of a challenge to understand, and trying to bring in some sort of governance to a startup, some sort of predictability was a challenge, and something that I really had to understand. It's like, well, why wouldn't you do it this way? And it's that mindset that's completely different in a startup environment, right?
Yeah. Let's go back. So let's before we dive into that in particular, let's go back a little bit. So you were in corporate America for a while, which in general is the opposite of go fast and break things. If we're painting here with broad strokes. So talk to me a little bit about the setup here. What was it like for you to kind of be part of this slower moving engine, for lack of better terminology?
So when I started, I was actually in IT, and I worked in corporate America in IT. I worked my way all the way through, from help desk, eventually CTO, and then I pivoted over to sales. And again, I stayed in corporate America. I came to realize really three things in corporate America. One is 80% of your job in corporate America is getting through the political BS, and 20% is actually doing your job. The other thing I realized was I worked at tech companies throughout my career, and every single tech company, large tech company, says the exact same thing, which is we're innovators. It's furthest from the truth. None of them innovate. What they do is they wait for a startup to innovate. Then, as soon as a startup gets some traction, they acquire that startup, or at the very least, invest in that startup. And then the third thing I realized was that in corporate America, and this actually happened to friends of mine, where when you get to your early 60s, all of a sudden you're presented with an optional early retirement program. it's optional, right? And if you don't take it, yeah, and if you don't take it, you got a target on your back the next time there's layoffs. So all three of those things just came to a head for me and said, yeah, I said, I think there's something else out there. And that's what prompted me to look for something else. And for me, because of my tech background, I love tech. I love innovation. I said, I want to work with startups because they're the ones that are truly innovating. But I want to bring in some process to these startups so that they can scale predictably. And that was the reason why I moved over and about 5 years ago and started focusing primarily with startups.
As you were starting to begin working with startups that are working at this pace of, go fast and break things, talk to me a little bit about those initial few weeks or few months as you're learning to adjust to this new velocity.
So, yeah, that's an excellent question. In the beginning, when you're working in corporate America, it's this is your job and that's all you do. Just don't step outside of it. You're going to step on someone's toes, right? So, and if you do that long enough, you're the guy that does that job, and you get typecast as that person, right? So, it was difficult to learn something new. But when it came to startups, there was a couple things that I honestly was not expecting. One of them was literally how fast things move. So understanding that, especially coming from corporate America, things just start to go at a glacier pace, right? So at a startup, it's like, oh
Yeah.
my God, every day is different. And so that was one aspect. It kind of took me off guard. But the other thing was the amount of things I would learn. The first 2 years when I started doing everything on my own, I did not make a single penny. I was doing work pro bono just to get a good understanding of what was going on. I learned so much about business that I guarantee you that most MBA students have no clue just by working with startups. What needs to happen, how it needs to work, what things you have to implement to make it successful. I mean, I learned so much about business that I never would have learned if I was stuck in corporate America. So that was one aspect of it. And then the other aspect was, coming up with new innovative ways to do what you need to move the startup to that next phase. And when it comes to startups, you're kind of looking at it, 5 years down the road, this is where we want to be, but you're hyper focused on the next phase. How do we get to that next phase? What do we do to get to that next phase? Once you get to the next phase, then it's the next phase. But the goal is, where do we want to be? All right. So you still have to kind of keep an eye on that. In corporate America, that wasn't the case. It was someone told you, hey, this is what we're working on, and you do this. Now, I understand if you're an EVP or a president of a business unit within corporate America, you have to look at it from, hey, where do we want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever the case is. And you start to implement certain things. But by the time you implement them, by the time you see results, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, right? It runs so slow. The startup, on the other hand, you implement something, you see the results almost immediately. And that is satisfying, right?
Startups are all different, right? And the amount of, not togetherness, but the amount of the ability of them to have their ducks in a row on a regular basis, their organizational skills, typically speaking, are very lacking because, again, they're moving fast and breaking things. Whereas in corporate America, everything has its row, its column, and the 25 people that have to approve it before it gets movement, right? And so, how, going into this startup world, did you really bring about, how did you cope with the lack of organization on maybe some of these different growth metrics and things along those lines?
So that's an excellent point that you bring up. So first of all, you're right. Startups are all different, right? They're going to be in different stages. But if you bring some order into a startup, you're going to see results immediately. So yes, there was most startups are just completely disorganized. So,
Yeah.
that was one aspect. It was like you got to bring some sort of organization into it. And if you do, you will see results. And there are going to be significant results that you see come out of that. Now, one thing I realized in the beginning when I first started working with startups, I didn't know what kind of startups to work with. I was kind of all over the place. Um, what I realized was for me, I'd rather focus primarily on B2B startups, uh, primarily in the SaaS or services space, because I knew exactly what to do to get them to that next phase. But then the other thing you have to be aware of is customer success, which is often overlooked. And it's when I tell founders, what have you done for customer success? And they're like, well, once we get enough customers, then we'll deal with it. And I said, no, you need to deal with it now, because a 5% increase in customer retention can equate to anywhere from a 25 to a 95 increase in profit, right? Which is huge. And if you're ignoring that, you're shooting yourself in the foot, right? So that's just another thing that you got to bring in.
So, wrapping things up, looking back, what is the one thing that you wish you knew sooner that would have made your path a little bit clearer?
So I think one of the biggest things was being organized up front. I didn't realize how organized I needed to be, especially when you're doing fractional work. You're switching from one client to another. You've got to be
Uh-huh.
organized, right? So in the beginning, I started just taking notes. I had notebooks upon notebooks of all the notes that I used to take. And that just started becoming inefficient. So I started to use tools instead. And so note taking tools, I can't live without it. It just organizes everything. I also have my own CRM, which organizes all my contacts. Essentially, I use it as a Rolodex. Another tool that I found in the beginning, it was just a nightmare managing my calendar across multiple clients. It was very, very difficult. I would spend 2 hours every Sunday just organizing what's going on for next week. It's just a waste of my time. So I found another tool which automatically syncs up my calendars across all my clients. Again, so now with AI, it just makes it a lot easier to stay organized. But you've got to be
Yeah.
organized, and if you're not organized, it's just going to be a headache, and uh, you'll never have a clear path. You'll always be stressed out, thinking about, oh my God, did I do this? Did I do that? Did I forget to do something? What do I have to do? Right. So once you're organized, makes life a lot easier.
The question that I wanted to look at here today was, what are you doing to retain your customers? One of my longtime advisors and mentors gave me this very simple 4-part framework in terms of customers. You have retaining customers, first and foremost. You can reactivate old customers. You can get referrals from existing customers. And then finally, you recruit new customers in. And this order of operations is especially true when it comes to agency life in general, whether you're fractional or whether you run a full-blown agency with staff. Keeping your active customers around is so much cheaper and less time consuming than it is to go find somebody new. And so when I was walking through, like, learning, really understanding this deeply for the first time, one of the things that I went through was my processes around what am I doing to simply just stay in touch with people? Who are the partners that I have that I need to stay in touch with, and how can we possibly collaborate together? And then also looking at inactive clients and seeing, why are they inactive? Are they inactive just because they forgot that we existed, or are they inactive because they moved somewhere else to work with a different company? Uh, and then also referrals, and referrals are definitely a little bit, I know, understand, like, from a people pleasing perspective and not wanting to annoy people, it's definitely a lot harder there. And so I would first dive into the active client and the partnership route. how are you staying in touch with those people? How are you staying top of mind with your active clients? When is the last time that the founder, the CEO checked in with those customers to see how their company is doing at a very high level? Not talking about project specific details here, talking about things like communication and quality of work and timeliness, and just helping that client zoom out a little bit and make sure that their team is actually executing at the level that they expected when they signed the contract. And then using this zoomed out conversation as a springboard into talking about what's upcoming, what's happening in the future. Let's go ahead and start planning things out and start, inching towards being more of that thought partner with that customer and less of just a straight order taker. And I have found that when I have been consistent in having regular monthly, quarterly check-ins with active clients that really help them zoom out, those are the ones that stick around the longest. And we're also able to find small, tiny problems that happen because at the end of the day, we're all human, right? And be able to solve those challenges while they're tiny versus letting them grow and grow and grow inside kind of like an avalanche to where nobody could then solve the issue because it's been around for so long now. That's what Sal got me thinking.